Subcommittee, and we'll begin by confirming the presence of a quorum. So we actually have 5 of 7. Is that right, Elaine? Or 4 or 7?
That's correct.
Okay, so a quorum is present. I'd like to remind any other attendees that public comments are taken at Child Support Commission meetings, but not at subcommittee meetings. So this will be a shorter meeting than we normally have because we would not have any public comments at the end. No, Ms. Latanya, you want to go ahead and make comments on rules and procedures?
Good afternoon, everyone. So sorry about the technical difficulties, but we're going to move on. Just briefly, here are a few rules to help us navigate this meeting today via Zoom webinar. Our Economic Subcommittee meeting members and staff panelists can speak anytime during this meeting. All others are considered attendees and are muted. As of today, we will not take public comments during this particular meeting. I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Tutterow.
Great, thank you very much. And again, I think this will be a relatively compact meeting. We previously had our last subcommittee meeting on October 6, 2021. That's of course where we discussed and brought forward the recommendations to do another study looking at the methodologies and the economic data that supports the tables. First time we've done that in quite a while. And then of course we moved to do the rest of the work in the entire commission meetings. There's no meetings to review. They've all been previously approved via e-vote. So previously members of the Economic Study Committee, or maybe even the entire commission, have received soft copies of the report for review. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what we need to do, and I'm just going to kind of lead in and tell you what I would recommend we do at this point. There's really a couple of components to Jane's work to this point. One is to actually do the case sampling, which, as you know from reviewing the report, we did it for we had a larger sample than we typically had in the past, and we collected the data that is required to be submitted to the governor and then to the federal government. And so that part of the work, I think, is done, other than correcting some typos, and unless we hear of other technical concerns from any of the subcommittee members. And then the second part of our work is we went ahead and we had Jane construct tables for us to be used for the purposes of establishing child support. We had a lot of discussion at the last meeting regarding that. Jane Venora presented them to us, and to kind of refresh everyone's memory, way back in 2006, we decided to go with a averaging of the Engel estimates and the Rothbard estimates. And that performed pretty well, we thought, for a long period of time. When we went back and estimated them this time, or Jane estimated them, she noticed that the Engel numbers had actually dropped significantly, and there was general concern about the methodology, and that had been noted, I think, in the reviews by some other states. And so what Jane had brought forward as a recommendation would be not to necessarily look at doing the averaging again, but whether we just go with the one tables if we ought to change things. So, I mean, I'm just going to weigh in as a member of one. If we have concerns about the viability of the Engel estimates, and they clearly have moved relative to where they were in 2006, I think, you know, we may end up deciding that what we're going to want to do is only look at the new tables that she produced and the old, and perhaps choose between those. But before we did that, what I was going to recommend we do as an economic subcommittee is go ahead and approve to go from the subcommittee to the entire Child Support Commission, the part of the report that deals with case sampling and data, and allow that to be referred forward by the entire Child Support Committee so that it can be again reviewed with the governor's office and the appropriate federal oversight. And Latanya, Lane, and Noel, is that consistent with what we think we probably need to do to meet our timeline?
Yes, this is Elaine. Okay. And yes, the report that Dr. Venor has furnished us would be what we would include with the entire document that we'll pull together that will include, basically it'll have this report and it'll have a summary report from the commission itself, signed by Noel. It will have our existing statute, our existing table in there, plus the tables that have been included in the study that Dr. Benor prepared. And that would be provided federal OCSC, the Division of Child Support Services, the governor's office, and the legislature, all in the early part of January of 2023.
Good, but that point would not contain a recommendation from us on which actual tables to use at this point.
That's correct. It would just be filing the report, but it would not be making any kind of recommendation on the table at this point, unless, of course, and that's something that the commission would take up on November 4th at their next meeting, where they would make that final decision, is my understanding.
Okay.
That theoretically would not include any immediate legislation attached to that, or recommendations for legislation?
That's my understanding, Mr. Clay, is that it would not necessarily, the filing the report does not go with legislation. They are not together. That would be, legislation would be completely separate. All we're doing would be meeting the requirements of the 45 CFR 302.56. We would be meeting those requirements for the study that we have to do every 4 years.
Correct. But I'm just curious, there's not going to be a recommendation, or is that still open for debate as to whether or not there'll be a committee recommended legislation?
I believe, and Dr. Tutterow or Noel, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be a decision the commission would make on the 4th of November at their next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and I think based upon the full commission meeting last time, there appears to be some sense that because there will be other components of the analysis, the statute reviews wrestling with, for example, that we probably don't want to drop legislation until we have basically all in one. I don't think we want to drop piecemeal and keep adding different components. So it's highly likely that the legislation would not come around till perhaps 2024.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, great. One other issue, and then I'm going to make a personal recommendation and see what help people feel. There is the issue about high income in the calculation. In the previous tables, the highest income for which recommended child support numbers were given was $30,000. And we went ahead and Jane took that up to $40,000. So I think, you know, considering that between 2006 and date, you've seen, you know, a lot of inflation in that 16-year window. Going from 30,000 to 40,000 for the top seems pretty reasonable. So I mean, I guess I'm hoping one of the things that we'll form as motions in a moment would be that the subcommittee would end up agreeing to go ahead with the recommendation to take them up to 40,000. I wanted to share a couple of comments before we, you know, make any of these decisions. And one, I'm speaking in my capacity as an economist now. One of the things that I think has caused some confusion in both the public comments and discussions with some members is it is true that we have not updated the tables since 2006. Now, at first pass, that might lead one to believe, well, gosh, we've had a lot of inflation since 2006. So that means you're awarding child support, not factoring any of that in. And that's not actually correct. What we have to remember is if we have a pure inflation, for example, if prices went up 10% in 1 year, and if wages went up 10%, then what would happen is it would kick the parties into a higher income bracket, and they would have higher child support based upon that. Where the problem comes in and where the need to periodically review the tables comes from is the issue that as incomes go up, the amount of consumption per dollar of income may change over time, but also between 2006 and 2022, there's been a lot of changes in terms of what we purchase. A good example would be my phone. We did not have smartphones in 2006, or at least I didn't have one. We had these little flip phones. So as the basket of what we purchase changes over time, it would change for a fixed amount of income what the components associated with child support would be. So it is certainly meritorious to go back and use newer tables, but I don't want people to think that because we have not updated the tables in 15 or 16 years, that we have not considered the effect of rising price level. That is factored in, because in a rising price world, both the income goes up and the consumption. So the real trick is, do people go back and get their child support payments adjusted with enough frequency to stay up with the income? It's less a problem with the tables and more a problem with how frequently we revisit the setting of child support. The second point I wanted to make as an economist, there were some comments from the public one time regarding the high income calculations. And one of the things that I think can be misleading is if you looked at someone or looked at a combined gross income of $30,000, that's where the table maxed out. Well, unfortunately, the feedback I received, people thought if you took the amount of required child support for $30,000 and divided that by 30,000, then that would be the percentage of every dollar that should go to child support above 30,000. And that is simply not correct. In finance or public finance, we have the concept of average tax rates and marginal tax rates. And as we know in our income taxes, your marginal rate goes up over time, or as your income rises. And so the marginal tax rate on high dollars of income is actually higher than the average across all of your income. In the case of child support, it's the opposite. When we get to high income child support, every additional dollar of income, a smaller percentage of that goes into the calculation of child support. Under the old tables, for every dollar above about 30,000, it was roughly 2.8%. So I think some people, perhaps even in some litigation, they've taken the average child support divided by the income and said that tells you how much more each additional dollar is required. So we'll need to be very careful, and I'm willing to write something up as needed to clarify that the marginal rates above any threshold that we set is not the same thing as the average rate on all income below that. So I just kind of want to get in the record that we have been discussing and thinking about those issues. I'm happy to try to draft it up in a more economic jargon-free way if it helps us understand better and helps us ensure the public that we're correctly thinking about issues as they relate to high-income individuals. So I guess my recommendation today as one member would be that we go ahead and approve the case sampling data so that part of the report can go ahead and be forwarded to the governor's office and to federal oversight, and that we go ahead and take the calculations of the BCOS table up to 40,000, and we discuss with the entire commission whether we want to add an antidote that says for amounts above that, you might consider the following adjustment for higher income.
That would be very helpful. Do we, at this point, do we need motions, or what do you want to entertain, or what do you need to entertain?
Yeah, I think I would be happy to make that as a motion, or you can, Chuck, and I'll second it. Or Chuck,
no, you make the motion in your verbiage so it'll be correct, and I'll second it.
Okay, then I think I've hit them already, but making a motion that we forward the case sampling data and analysis that appears in Dr. Vernooy's report, we go ahead and forward that as being recommended by the Economic Subcommittee, subject to a final vote of the entire Child Support Commission. And that would be one motion. If you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. All opposed say the same.
Aye.
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 Okay, so I think we got it. Any opposed? Great, so that's taken care of. On the issue of high income, I recommend that we go ahead and the Economic Subcommittee recommend that we take the tables up to $40,000, that I will confer with Dr. Vernooy about making sure that our interpretation of anything that we can say about above 40,000 is consistent with her meaning, and that we share that at the commission level. But when it gets to the entire Child Support Commission, it already has a recommendation from the Child Support Economic Study Subcommittee to take it up to 40 grand.
So moved.
There's a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Hearing none, that motion passes unanimously as well. So I think in terms of action item, that's all we have to do today. I encourage the Economic Subcommittee members to dig in a little bit into the report. I'm happy to get one-on-one with people since I'm used to looking at this kind of geeky economic stuff and help try to put it in normal people speak so that we will be able to serve as a better resource to the entire commission when we meet in November. I also don't see the need to schedule another subcommittee meeting at this time unless LaTanya, Elaine, and Noel, you see any work for us beyond before the next commission meeting?
No, sir, I don't at this point in time, unless there's something that comes from the commission, but I don't see anything. I do want to add one thing so everyone will know. Noel and LaTanya and I are reading the report. I have finished reading it, and there are some typographical errors in there. There are some words occasionally that it should be something else, and instead of what's in there. There was even a place where there's an error message, and I think they meant to insert something. So we're going to have to report that information back to Dr. Venor for her to make, a few corrections. And with the three of us are working on that internally, and we'll ask her to send us a finished report before the 4th of November so that it can be redistributed to the members on this subcommittee and the commission, and making sure that what the commission looks at on the 4th of November would be the version that they are approving.
Right, and based on your cursory review or editing review, you didn't see substantive errors, just a question about typos and whether it was communicated in the clearest fashion. Correct.
Exactly. And I think Noel and I have talked about it a little bit earlier today, and I think we were in consensus on that. Great. Unless she wants to speak to that. Noelle's on the phone. She can certainly speak to that.
No, everything you said was fine, Elaine. Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Great. Okay, well, I think that pretty much covers our agenda for today. And no reason to, since we said no reason to schedule another meeting. We will see everyone at the meeting of the entire commission in November. And again, I'm available if anyone wants to talk about any of the technical aspects of the report. Any other subcommittee members have business with the subcommittee? We're hearing none, then I assume we stand adjourned.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Have a good day.
The recording has